All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We hope you're able to get out, walk around, grab some coffee. We're really thrilled to have you join us for our second session, which is focused on biking for our brains and our minds. And as we heard from our keynote speaker, we know the benefits of physical activity go well beyond our physical health. And in this session, we'll learn about how physical activity, like cycling, can transform our brains, and we'll also learn about innovative programming from around the world that's really focused on harnessing that power of the bike to support our mental well-being. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker lineup for this session, and then we'll move right into our speakers. And so for these sessions, we will have live Q&A. So both the live audience, if you have a question, we'll have a time at the end. Someone will bring the microphone to you. If you're online, please do put your questions in through the Zoom Q&A function. And so with that, I'll introduce our speaker lineup and then jump in. And our first presenter for today, many of you may have recognized him from Sea Otter when he was there as well, is Dr. Luke Bashford. And Dr. Bashford is a neuroscientist and cyclist, and his research interests and work with Outride really seek to improve that social, emotional, and cognitive health by further understanding the changes in the brain caused by cycling and spending time in nature. We'll then hear from Stefan Lönngren, who's dialing in all the way from Sweden. And he has spent his life on two wheels and has years of experience working with people with neurodevelopment disabilities. He's worked as a project manager for the Swedish government-funded project, Trail Cycling for Children and Young People with ADHD and Autism. And he believes in the power of creating conditions that allow trail cycling to become a regular activity for all. And the power of such programs to support public health and inclusion. Finally, in this session, we'll hear from Dr. Christine Fox. Dr. Fox is the Mountain Bike Health Programs Manager for developing mountain biking in Scotland. She's convinced she has the best job in the world and is passionate about getting as many folks on bikes, or as possible outdoors, on bikes of all kinds and into nature. So we look forward to this great lineup of speakers, and don't forget to submit your questions.
Stefan heter jag jobbar på Cykelfrämjandet och vi vill ge så många som möjligt chansen att testa stigcykling, alltså att cykla mountainbike på stigar i skogen. Och varför man skulle vilja testa det kan jag prata väldigt länge om, men vi har också frågat folk som redan har testat varför de cyklar i skogen.
I'm on the higher functioning scale of the autism. The biking has definitely helped me learn patience, because when I was younger I was very fidgety, and Mum and Dad got told that I wasn't going to be able to ride a bike. I found this hard. They're like, well, you can't blame it on this. Like, it's just something about who you are. Like, you can do other things, and I think definitely having the drive to be like supported and pushed, now being like an elite level rider for enduro in New Zealand, it's definitely pretty special to prove all those people can do what they said I can't do. To give people like who are younger the opportunities for those that otherwise may not be able to afford to buy a bike, and now they can do it and experience it and see how much fun it is, and obviously like how much, with like my story, how much biking like benefited me once I got fully into it. Don't ever give up on your child or yourself. Believe in them, and they can do things, and they'll give it their all as much as they possibly can, and they may need like a little bit of help from you, but like really just like don't give up on them. Encourage them, work with them, like be alongside them.
För mig är cykling i skogen något som är väldigt avslappnande, och jag blir alltid väldigt glad och positiv efter att jag har varit ute.
för det är ju väldigt bra träning och det är superskoj. Superkul!
Av många anledningar, men framförallt för att det är så otroligt roligt. Det är fantastiskt att kunna komma ut i skog och natur och få pausa och fyllas med energi. Sen tycker jag det är jätteroligt också för jag cyklar med min son, så det är en fantastisk tillfälle att träffa både honom och andra människor.
All right, and with that, we'll pass it over to Stefan, who will tell us a little bit more about the programming they have going on in Sweden.
Thank you, Esther, and hi, everyone. I'm so happy and honored to be here today, and already super inspired by how this is spreading globally. So much excellent work going on. I just want to mention about the film. It's filmed in Sweden with Swedish super cyclists, as I call them, but also includes that very special guest from New Zealand, with, I hope you heard his highly inspirational life story and writing. So I'm going to talk briefly about the inspiration for this Swedish project, about important lessons learned, how it's been received by people participating, and the first ever research study on this topic in Sweden, plus some plans and ideas for the future. So yeah, there's the slide. Excellent, slide 3. The inspiration for this project, 2 colleagues of mine, they went to the IMBA Summit in Denmark in 2019. IMBA stands for International Mountain Biking Association, and they too have a summit. They learned about this project in Scotland, where mountain biking was used in ongoing treatment for mental health or mental illness. They were inspired. They went home to Sweden and wrote an application for some government funding, which was granted, luckily. And later, I also discovered this very important work initiated by Mike Sinyard. So I just want to say thank you, Mike. Safe to say Mike is the reason we're all here today, right? I started as the project manager on the 10th of February, and what a time to launch a new project, right? Timing could have been better, bikes selling out globally. So chasing bicycles was a big thing that first year. I don't mind chasing bikes. Next slide, please. I found some bikes, and in September of 2020, we got to ride with the first 3 groups and get a glimpse of how good this could be. The potential was huge. Next slide, please. Now, the focus group were children and young people ages 7 to 27, and I found them in 3 different categories: kids and parents, activity centers, and schools. The best results were with schools and centers, where there are already staff with established relations with the participants working. That way, the only new thing is me and bikes showing up to the safe place they're already at, where I have scouted a suitable trail beforehand, of course. The first group was a little more challenging, and they are the real heroes of this story. Exhausted kids and parents struggling to make everyday life work. All the respect to them. Only to find a day and time where 5 different families could fit this new activity in was hard. But I did get to share some fantastic experiences with all 3 groups. We've been laughing, we've been crying. And for me to be there, witnessing when a kid finally finds the thing they actually want to continue doing is just incredible, especially when riding with their parent. And many times, I only found out later what huge personal breakthroughs were being made during a bike ride. For example, when nearing the end of a ride, I gave a mother and son the option to either go home or ride a little longer and check out this nearby lake. And the kid chooses the lake instead of the fastest way home to a screen. The mother later told me this was totally unbelievable and that it gave her so much hope for the future. So, a small thing for me, huge thing for them. And here's a quote that sums up a lot of the feedback. When we got home from riding with you for the first time, I asked my son what he thought, and he said he thought it was fun. It was the first time in years I'd heard him say the word fun. So there's some tragedy in that, but for the parent, also a lot of hope. Next slide, please. In this picture, a little side note, in 2022, we got some extra funding to give Ukrainian refugees a chance to try mountain biking in Sweden. A much appreciated break for everyone participating. And here we see four brothers who just never wanted to stop riding. Now, main takeaways after these 3 years. It's hard. Convincing people that this is worth trying is hard. Fitting this activity into a school curriculum is hard. Getting groups confident enough to ride on their own is hard. Finding trails suitable for beginners close to the beginners is hard. But at the same time, it's easy. Once out on the trail, it's usually smooth sailing. Every rider knows how uniquely well it works, that cocktail of physical activity, forest, and focus. And when you keep that ride away, as far away from an average soccer practice as you can, and let many small successes in a row build a pile of big success and self-esteem, limits are slowly pushed forward and often spread to other contexts as well. They also, when riding with me, they learn how to fail in a good way. All right, it is actually safe. Contrary to popular belief, it is safe. And I just realized that after having introduced over 300 new riders with little or no impulse control to trail cycling, not one person was badly injured. A little blood on one girl's hand is all. And she's still riding. From the start, I put a lot of effort into creating a safe method, and apparently it worked. It's magic. Judging by the look on the faces of the many parents and teachers who found it totally unreal that there exists an activity that the majority of this group want to continue doing, it is magic. And this is also the name of the first research of this kind in Sweden. And here to talk about that am I, since my collaborator Jonas couldn't make it here today. He's very sorry. Next slide, please. Yeah, a magic activity on two wheels. The first research study in Sweden at the Swedish School of Sport and Health Sciences. It's a very small study, but it's the first one, and we have to start somewhere, right? I only provided the guided bike rides twice a week for a month, but I have read the report. Yeah, and the aim of the study was to increase physical activity. And the research question, does the participants' VO2 max increase after regular trail cycling for 4 weeks? And what do you think? Next slide, please. Of course it did. Physical activity increased. If you do nothing, it's easy to increase that. And there was a 3 to 4% VO2 max increase before and after riding for 4 weeks, twice a week. And most importantly, all participants loved the activity, which is, I think, the real magic with this activity. That's actually them you see in the photo there. Behind me taking the picture is central Stockholm, which is pretty amazing because you see the forest is very near. Okay, next slide, please. We have some future Swedish ambitions. We want to repeat the research you do outright at Stanford. We need to repeat those good results in a European context. That's what I'm planning with Jonas, I met him as a parent riding with his son in the project, but he also happened to work at the Royal Institute of Technology. So we are planning to do some research, hopefully big enough to get the attention of people with money deciding big things. And the aim is to make good projects permanent, because we're so very tired. I think that's probably globally. No matter how good a project is, it ends. And then you have to invent a new project with a new focus group. So we want to make this into something that's just offered to everyone in schools. My dream is to make what you do, the Writing for Focus school cycling program, to be in every school here in Sweden. We'll see how that goes. Okay, we also need more trails close to home. And if we go to the next slide, I have a new thing I want to tell you about. I'm really excited. It's called the Home Trail Project. And this was because I identified that easy trails are super hard to find where people live. But small, forgotten sections of forest are everywhere in Sweden, even in residential areas. And that's all that's needed. It doesn't take much. A short trail loop is all you need to try to get your first experience. And if that's next to your school or close to where you live, it's going to happen. If it's far away at some bike park or a mountain bike area, you need parents that can drive you there. So you only reach the usual middle-class people that get to ride mountain bikes. With this project, I want to reach the other people. And I'm going to build something. What you see in the photo here is the first sections of trail I raked up this past winter. I have a permission from the landowner. It's the municipality who are giving me free hands to create something here. I have some pilot funding granted. And we're going to find out if it's possible to build a short beginner mountain bike trail and pump track with people living in my neighborhood using only manual labor. That means we include people in a huge part of the mountain biking culture and community, which is building trails. So everyone doesn't have to ride a bike. You can also just build. It's actually a free gym, isn't it? Yeah, so those are the best plans for the future right now. So wish me luck. This project starts August 1st. Hopefully I'm not alone digging. Thank you, and happy trails.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And with that, we have a few minutes for questions. So either through the Zoom Q&A or in person. We got one here.
Hi, Stefan. My name is John Glodek. I am a middle school Writing for Focus teacher, and I heard you mention that your goal is to get the Outride's Writing for Focus program into schools in Sweden. And I was wondering if you have connections to the educational system there in Sweden to get that door open and get some conversation started.
I have. That's the school that I did the research study with. They're the ones I've been riding the most with, about 15, 20 rides. And they're part of, it's, how do you say it? It's a school that's part of the municipality, Stockholm City. So they have an example already inside the school system. And I don't know, it's tricky. It's hard to get people to understand how good it is, even though you have solid proof, I think. That's where we need more research, I think. The good thing is Jonas, the guy I work with, he has the ears of the city, because they're struggling to get the citizens out into activity, preferably in nature. And I believe we have a great part of the solution. So hopefully, I think the time needed. A big challenge is the perceived image of mountain biking for the people who don't ride, because they see the crazy Red Bull madness, people doing backflips over ravines, and they think I'm suggesting that for their cute students. And it's hard to get them to realize we're taking a walk in the forest. We just happen to be on bikes. That's pretty much it. Okay.
Oh, we see another question back there. Thank you, Stefan.
Greetings, Stefan. My name is Jeremiah Comison. I'm also a Riding for Focus champion in Windsor, California. And my question for you is, the data with the subject school that you worked with, did you see market improvements in behavioral, attendance, those mental health aspects that we've talked so much about within the Outride program? I'm just curious if you were seeing that as well, or if you had data accumulation to demonstrate that.
Yeah, no, I didn't really conduct the study. That was students at this university, but the teachers, they have all the stories to tell, but I haven't. That's not documented. But they are so impressed that their students, and one of the students, she told me, because I asked her when I was going to come ride next morning, so does anyone want to ride, do you think? Is there any excitement? And she says, there's always excitement when you're coming with the bikes, when they know you're going to come and they're going to ride with you. And that's very strange because they never show any enthusiasm for anything. Like, nothing is fun, right? But when, well, and then she says, yeah, actually one thing, when they're going to get to go to McDonald's and eat, then they're stoked. That's McDonald's, and when they're going to get to ride mountain bikes with me. So I don't know what that says about the whole thing. Maybe the same center in the brain is stimulated. I don't know.
We'll get that question out there for you. Well, thank you very much. I think that is all the time we have for questions for now. I know we have a lot more, interested in your perspectives working with students with ADHD and autism, and so we can link up those questions with you, and hopefully you'll hear more from you and your projects in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we will move on to Dr. Christine Fox, and then we'll loop back again to Dr. Bashford. So Christine, take it away.
Hello. Yes. Well, thanks so much for inviting me here. I hope you can hear me. I'm here to talk about a program we run in Scotland called Trail Therapy. It's not a big program, but it's one that seems to be gathering a bit of momentum and just a degree of interest, not just in the UK, but actually worldwide. And for us, that's really, really exciting. What Trail Therapy does is it looks to support folk diagnosed with mental ill health. It's about getting people out into nature, getting physically active, having adventures, although importantly, these adventures are ones that are relative to individual comfort zones, because this is about mountain biking. What is also important is that the adventures, the activity, the risk is authentic. And we know that is a really important thing, because there is a risk in mountain biking. And I like that Stefan said that, he's had a few little bits of cuts and scrapes. We've certainly had that in the program too. We've had a few broken bits and bobs as well. But it does mean that mountain biking seems to appeal to folk as a way of supporting their mental ill health and going forward. I'm going to be talking about mountain biking, but I suspect what we see in this program is not unique to mountain biking. There will be other activities out there that will be able to have the same beneficial help. So I really like this picture. I put this picture up and I use it a lot. This is one of the programs we ran, and it's in an area in Scotland, Lanarkshire. And this was an accidental photo that, the guys out riding, they just actually came across this sign, and it was part of the trail therapy activity that they were doing at the time. I just think it's a very, very powerful picture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, if we can have the next slide, please. Just by telling you a little bit about developing mountain biking in Scotland. I'm going to keep it quite brief. We say we're the voice for the mountain biking community in Scotland, but also beyond. It's developing mountain biking in Scotland, or a small project that sits within Scottish Cycling. Scottish Cycling are our national governing body. for all things cycling. And developing mountain biking in Scotland it's a very small team. There's 6 or 7 of us. We're all super passionate about mountain biking, and we are all super passionate about just getting outdoors and the benefits of the outdoors. We have 4 main pillars that we work to. We look to trails, trail building, working with landowners. We've got some phenomenal access rights in Scotland that enable us to make the most of the landscape we've got. We look to innovation. We do that through working with universities. We look to destinations, supporting different areas in Scotland. Tourism is really, really important to Scotland. But most excitingly for me is what we call the health pillar. And that's really where trail therapy sits. The health pillar for us is about increasing access to mountain biking. Whether it's a sport, whether it's a pastime, whether you're doing it professionally, it's about just encouraging more people to get out on the bike and enjoy nature. In Scotland, in the UK, I don't know if it's across the world, but mountain biking is very male dominated. So a big part of what we do is actually look to support and mentor and train riders from underrepresented communities within the sort of mountain biking arena. This could be women, girls, people who are physically disabled, people of colour. We mentor and train and support them to become guides and leaders. And this is the foundation for us of trail therapy, because these people can act as role models within the communities that they represent, because otherwise it is really hard to be what you can't see. So if you can't see a relatable role model, then actually it's going to be even harder when you're faced with other challenges to get out and to have a go at mountain biking. So a big part of what we do is just diversifying our tutors, our leaders, our guides, our coach pool. And that helps give us a framework for trail therapy itself. So if we can have the next slide, please. I'm going to give you just a wee overview of trail therapy itself. Because we want it to be accessible to all, we do have this bank of trained leaders, trained coaches that we work with. The mountain biking itself, really important. We've found that because mountain biking has this combination of skill development, enhanced fitness, which leads to that increased confidence, people can develop skills, they can try again and again, and that helps encourage greater resilience, because failure is dealt with in a real life situation, not inside the walls of a clinic or a hospital. It can be dealt with, it can be reframed, it can be moved on from. An important thing about what we do as well is really being able to support the riders and the mental health challenges that they might experience on the trail. This is paramount, and because of that, all of our tutors, our coaches, our guides, they're all trained not only as mountain bike leaders so that we can do that activity safely, but we look to mental health first aid, we look to physical health first aid. We look to child protection, wellbeing training, protecting vulnerable groups training as well. So there's actually an awful lot goes on behind the scenes to ensure that the guides that we use are suitable really and open to the activities that we're doing. What we look to do is through our tutors, through our leaders, is about getting riders, encouraging riders to live in the moment, to develop healthy ways that they can cope with stress, regulate their emotions, improve relationships with others. We often use talking therapies, and we encourage, but we don't force people to discuss their thoughts and their feelings when they're out riding. It is really effective, and one of the reasons we think it's effective is because when you're out riding, particularly mountain biking, you can see it in this picture, you're side by side. So you don't feel forced to have a conversation, but if you do, you're not face to face. There's not that white eye contact, which can sometimes be quite intimidating for people. When we run our sessions, there's a number of therapeutic activities that are linked into these. We have mindfulness-based techniques, and we actually take some of the principles of dialectic behavioral therapy into the activities, into the mountain biking, into the nature, just really helping individuals kind of accept who they are, understand and accept and manage their emotions. For those that trail therapy works for, it can be transformative. And that's actually the words of some of our riders. That's not mine. It's probably worth mentioning, I talk about riders, and when I'm mentioning riders, I use that term very broadly. These are patients, these are clients, these are folk who are maybe within the hospital, maybe out of the hospital environment, maybe within counselling services as well. So all under that banner of riders, as opposed to sort of patients and clients. If I can have the next slide, please. What is it we do? So trail therapy, there is a massive demand for it. It is in Scotland. There's a massive demand that we can't meet. There's a demand through the rest of the UK, and as I said, we're getting interest across the rest of the world as well. It's pretty amazing. I'm always surprised for such a very small project that is delivered actually on quite a bit of a shoestring. The program is fully externally funded. There is no core funding for this program. So we gather funding in, and we've had some very amazing people who have supported the program for a few months, in a region, for a year, for 2 years, and some funders that will support us year on year with just a small amount, but that's brilliant because we need that to keep the program going. When we first started the program, it was pretty much on instinct. It was the result of a very forward-thinking occupational therapist here within the Scottish borders, who was also a keen mountain biker, and she felt that actually there was something in what she was doing herself, mountain biking, that would help support some of the young people she was working with who were within the National Health Service care. We've now delivered over 1,000 sessions, over 100 folk across 5 regions in Scotland. We've got 2 hubs operating completely independent of us. One is an inpatient service within the hospital environment. Another is a community organisation that sits right in the centre of Scotland. And they've embedded trail therapy into what they do, which means even if we're unable to source funding going forward, their projects will still carry on, which is great. Folk come to us from within hospitals. Some are supported by third sector organisations. We might get referrals from doctors. Ages range from children, teenagers through to adults. We have single parent families who face isolation. We have folk who are being supported because through suicide prevention schemes. We work across all folk who need the activity. No one pays for any of the sessions. All the sessions are free. We provide bikes, we provide PPE as well. The program's delivered by a trained trail therapy mountain bike leader. That mountain bike leader, that trained person, is actually used to train others. So he is an experienced coach as well as a guide, and we found coaching is so important. He's a mental health first aid instructor. We heard that course mentioned earlier. And he's got a wealth of experience in what we call green prescription activity. What we do is we work specifically with regions or organisations. We talk to individuals, the community groups, the NHS. We work with occupational therapy staff, mental health practitioners, counsellors, and when we get funding, we develop a bespoke program that works for that organisation or that region. From there, we deliver blocks of activity, initially by our trail therapy mountain bike leader, but as part of that, we will then also train volunteers so that when we walk away, when we step away from that program, we have trained volunteers able to continue that without input of further funding. The ultimate aim really is for communities and groups we work with to become independent of us, enabling to actually deliver trail therapy in a very community focused way, a way that works specifically for them. Next slide, please. So one of the really important things about this is evaluation. We've heard it mentioned a couple of times. Without evaluation, independent evaluation, we would struggle not only to get further funding, but also to get these referrals in from these third sector organisations, from the NHS. Evaluation is key, and we've done that independently through Edinburgh Napier University, through the brilliant Dr. Holly Fountain. Now, she has done a series of interviews so that we've got qualitative and quantitative data. And what she's been able to do is analyze that and actually give us an idea as to how mountain biking trail therapy works. Why does it work? Why does it have such a profound effect on so many people who come through the process? We have what we call the road to recovery. So this is about building that baseline physical fitness, but also building confidence, building skills that enable people to actually continue mountain biking after we go. And we have folks that will come to our sessions, they will come to a number of blocks of activity, and then they'll go off and they'll have their own little cohort, because there's a social aspect to it as well. And that's really important, not just for friends, but also just to ensure that people will continue the activity because they've got support of other people to do it. Another part of this road to recovery and what we're very passionate about is actually encouraging folk who come through the program as riders, if they feel prepared and willing, to then actually come through the program at a later date to train to be a volunteer. And we will support them through mountain bike leadership training, through the first aid training of this sort of mental health and physical first aid training. Not only does that give them a feeling of self-worth going forward, but actually these are formal qualifications that we are offering. So that is an opportunity for employment out with this program long after this program has maybe finished for them. And that is really important for folks to be able to do that if they've suddenly found that mountain biking is working for them. Another area is, as I've kind of mentioned, this supportive community, isn't it? And it's really nice to see that through shared experiences, you know, there's challenges when you're mountain biking. It might be the challenge of trying to get over a feature that you didn't think you can do. It might actually be the weather, just feeling cold, just feeling uncomfortable, but you're all in it together. And that causes quite a strong feeling of well-being. Many of the experiences that Holly was witness to, that people talked to her about, came under this these social experiences where they were able to just get encouragement and support from other people within their group. One of the interesting things that we didn't expect was that came out of the evaluation was that riders felt that mountain biking and trail therapy had the potential to reduce stigma around treatments for mental health. Being part of the trail therapy program allowed those involved to share the trails with others without feeling they were being exposed or viewed as patients, because they would anybody else from the outside looking in would see is that actually this is just another group of riders, and that was very important for a lot of people. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to go through these next slides quite quickly. I can talk for hours on this, on trail therapy, but I appreciate this. You know, there's other people who need to speak as well. The opportunities we have for therapy within trail therapy can often be very subtle. We blend them into the mountain biking. We blend them into the nature. They're not necessarily part of a pre-planned intervention, but they take advantage instead of the sort of time and the place and just things that happen. And what I've got on the next few slides are just some quotes taken from that evaluation. I think they tell us a bit more about trail therapy and its impact, because they're very personal and a much better way of I suppose, discussing trail therapy than me just keep on waffling. So these are two I've kind of touched at that second one, where mountain biking offers the opportunities for people to have conversations, not just over a table, not face to face with a counsellor or a therapist, not in a clinical environment, but out on a bike side by side. No eye contact. It's not threatening. It's informal, and sometimes that's the best kind of therapy we've got. And I really like that. I've included the transformational quote above just because I think it's transformational, but it's really lovely to hear that from somebody else. When we're blending the therapies into mountain biking, just to give you an example so you can get a bit of, it's a bit more tangible for you. We often do things like the long pedal. Now that is exactly how it sounds. That is that long and arduous climb to the top of a hill. but it provides opportunities for conversations, nice and slow. And again, and this is where this quote about, not face-to-face, not eye contact has come from. It's come from that long pedal, that slog up a hill. But that opportunity it provides just for a chat. Next slide, please. So this was an interesting one for us. Night leading, night riding. We didn't anticipate doing this for trail therapy. And the reason for that is night riding can be very claustrophobic. It can be intimidating. It can be really scary. And we weren't entirely sure that this would be the best form of mountain biking for folk to experience. But we found ourselves in a situation where it wasn't the only option for one individual. And it worked. It worked really well. And this, again, is a quote from that evaluation we had. It puts your worries in perspective. It helps you know that the light, what you can see with the light, is your whole world. That helped, not just for biking, but for everyday life. And sometimes when you're worrying about things, they're actually not that big a deal. Some of the things that I'm worrying about, I don't need to be worrying about. And again, another lovely quote we've got. So we'll go to the next slide. What I'm going to talk about very briefly now is where we go with trail therapy. We've been running it for 4 years now. The big challenge for us is sustainability and getting that funding in to ensure that we keep going. Salaries aren't covered even by core funding for this. It's all external funding. And that's a shame because there are so many places we can go. Use of e-bikes and adaptive bikes for folk who maybe through illness or disability can't use a standard bike. Working with underrepresented communities, that's why we're working with our tutors and encouraging leaders and coaches to come out of those underrepresented communities. Working with young people at risk, and this is young people at risk of sort of criminal activity or are already engaging in criminal activity, because what we know is that actually the positive risk-taking element of mountain biking is the one that can actually sometimes work and appeal and help these young people manage the emotions, the challenging situations they find themselves in. And then bike packing. This is where I get excited. Or bothying. This is a wee bothy at the foot of the Cairngorms in Scotland, in the middle of the Highlands. Imagine if we can take people away from the difficulties they are having, not just for a couple of hours, but actually for a couple of days. They can overnight in some of the most beautiful places in Scotland. We think this could work really, really well. Your challenges, your problems are still going to be there at the end of the day, aren't they, when you get back? But for that brief 1 day, 2 days, your mind's been occupied, it's had a little bit of a rest. So lots of potential, lots of new places to go. And maybe you've got thoughts yourself, and I'd love to hear them. I'm going to finish with just one final slide. So if you can have the next slide, please. And this is the last quote. This was on a ride after Storm Arwen. So Storm Arwen, big storm, hit the north and the east coast of the UK about 18 months ago. With the winds coming from the north, we weren't used to that. Our trees weren't used to that. We lost a huge amount of forested area, but some of our folk went out riding afterwards. And this is a quote from one of them. Most of the trees have been cleared up at this point, and there was a big clear section, and then this tiny little tree, spindly tree in the middle. And somebody pointed out that it shows that even after the biggest storm, it's not always the biggest survive, but it's the smallest that survive. And I'm going to finish on that and open to any questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fox. And I think we have time for one question that has come in actually through the online Zoom. And so they want to know, what are some successful examples of inclusive cycling initiatives or programs that have effectively engaged individuals with disabilities and other marginalized identities while fostering a strong sense of community?
Wow, right. So one of the most recent programs we've been running is we've been working with two men who are both experience different physical disabilities, but both exceptional mountain bikers. And we've been working with them and our tutor network. Now, when we look at the way we have our tutors, our education system for mountain biking set up in the UK, we have a number of tutors. They deliver leadership training to our leaders, who then go out and obviously deliver leadership activity. Currently, we have no physically disabled mountain bike leadership tutors, which means right at the very top of that pillar, we have no relatable role models, which makes it hard to bring in leaders, and it makes it harder as well for riders who are physically disabled to actually just experience or realize that this is something for them. So we're running a series of programs where we are not only training two physically disabled mountain bike tutors, but we are also working with our whole network of tutors across Scotland and into the UK as well, supporting them so they can actually deliver led rides and also train leaders who are physically disabled themselves. So working within that community just to create those relatable role models. I think that answers your question. Apologies if it doesn't.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If there are additional questions, feel free to put those in the Zoom Q&A, and you can kind of peruse through those there as well. But thank you so much. It was great work, and we look forward to seeing what's next. So with that, we will move on to our final speaker of this session. So Dr. Luke Bashford, I think we've got him on with audio. So if Anthony Nates, we can move back to the first slides. We'll change gears a little bit. It was designed to give you first a little neuroscience introduction as we moved into then putting those kind of research into action. But we'll just do it a little backwards. So we've heard a little bit about the programs, and now Dr. Bashford is going to give us a mini neuroscience lesson and how neuroscience or how the brain, how cycling affects the brain. So take it away, Dr. Bashford.
Can you hear me this time? Yeah, we can. Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. I employed the most fundamental principle of computer science, which is to just turn everything off and on. So that solved all of my problems. So what I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about is how cycling can affect brain activity. And so I'm a neuroscientist. I'm also a keen cyclist. And so sort of for all the things that we sort of feel from being on a bicycle, all of these are attributed to various different activities in our brain and changes in activities in our brain, and understanding the sort of the relationship between that and the relation and the sort of the effects of cycling that individuals experience is a sort of a big part in sort of understanding why we see what we see and what we can do to sort of improve outcomes for individuals in the future. So if we just go to the next slide. So we've seen a lot now and heard a lot now about sort of behavioral changes due to cycling. These can be things like changes in mood, cognition, social and emotional health. And this is very clear from the literature. It's very clear from the experiences of the different programs we've heard about. And of course, most people who ride will have sort of one anecdotal story or another from someone or themselves who've sort of experienced some positive benefit from a ride. If we go to the next slide. So all of these behavioral changes are due to changes in the brain somewhere, somehow. Some of these we sort of identified in the literature. Others sort of remain to be found, to be studied. But the fundamental question there is that, you see that during cycling, during exercise, there are changes in the brain, changes in different areas of the brain, and somehow, in some way, these contribute to the behavioral changes we observe. And so finally, onto this, last slide here, is that there are, on top of both of these factors, sort of different types of cycling. And by this, I mean sort of indoor versus outdoor cycling, mountain versus road biking, sprint versus endurance, and all of these different ways of interacting with the bicycle, of interacting with nature, all sort of have different effects on behavioral outcomes. They have different effects on changes in brain activity. And so if we just go to the next slide, the sort of research question and the kind of the interest is sort of what is it that kind of starts to bring all of these together? What is it that kind of links all of these different aspects. You know, what is the relationship between the type of cycling that we do with the effect that has on the brain, and then the effect that we observe in various behaviors. So if we just go on to the next slide now, there are multiple different ways to record from the brain. The brain sort of is fundamentally made up of these individual cells called neurons, and they send electrical signals between one another. And then these are sort of electrical signals are sent between populations and networks across different cortical areas that have specific functions. And that whole population activity and all of the interactions between the different areas of the brain lead to the various behaviors that we observe. So at the sort of highest resolution, you can stick an electrode into some brain tissue and you can record from those single units themselves. This is what you see over on the left, and you know, here you're recording really from just one or two neurons, but you get a very, very, very high sort of spatial resolution, and you can look at exactly the activity of one part of the brain. But you know, this is a very invasive procedure, and it's certainly only used in very unique clinical settings. So you can sort of go out a little bit further, and you can sort of look at then the activity of multiple electrodes. Now, you can look at the activity of multiple electrodes, of multiple neurons, through multiple electrodes invasively, or you can do this non-invasively. So what we're looking here, this ECOG, these are brain signals, the electrical activity of the brain that is recorded from the surface of the brain. So it still requires a sort of, this is done in a clinical setting, but it gives us a slightly different look than the single activity of each cell. What it shows us now is sort of larger summed population. So rather than looking at the activity of a single cell, we're now looking at the activity of lots of cells in a particular area, and we're summing all that activity and getting a sense of how it's changing. The least invasive way, the non-invasive way of recording brain activity is then through sort of MEGs or EEGs. So this is where you're observing brain activity just through recording from the surface of the head, which is non-invasive at all, and it can be done sort of on anybody. So in healthy individuals, people who are part of patient populations, etc. So, for instance, you know, you may have had one of these yourselves as part of a, you know, as part of a science at some point, as part of a clinical visit. You may have been into an fMRI. This looks at similar sort of non-invasive brain activity, but it uses, rather than the electrical signal, the blood oxygen sort of response to the electrical activity in a certain area. And this is where we're sort of focusing most of our research, because these are the kinds of brain activities that can be collected across the largest population. So if you go to the next slide, you may not be familiar with EEG or how it's collected or what this looks like. So what you can see on the left here is a sort of a fairly typical example of an EEG cap. So each of those electrodes, each of those sensors there is placed according to an atlas over sort of specific parts of the brain. So there are sort of, you know, we can see a representation of that in the middle. Each of these positions is labeled with a certain coordinate that tells you over what part of the brain you're recording from. It could be a frontal area, a motor area, a parietal area. Many different areas in the brain contribute to many different functions. And through that, on the right-hand side, when we look at the activity, what we can look at is to see sort of whether or not the signal is sort of changing as a result of some of the tasks that we're doing. So there are various different ways to process the signal. But one of the ways is, if you look at the sort of the activity of this electrical activity that you record in the brain, you can see whether or not the strength or the power of different frequencies of activity within the brain signal change as a result of what you're doing. So in this example on the right-hand side here, you'll see that in this particular task, there is a certain frequency of brain activity which is sort of decreasing on the left-hand side in one condition and decreasing on the right-hand side in a different condition. And it's these changes that allow us to sort of learn what the brain is doing in response to certain behaviors. So if you go to the next slide. So the idea is that actually we can do this and collect these brain signals while cycling, or during a cycling session, you might want to take a baseline recording of someone's brain activity before they go for their ride, before they enter a program, and then they'll perform the program. You may take some recordings during. You might just let people just go for their ride and come back. And then afterwards, you take another recording, and you can look at the differences before and after the ride, and you can sort of see for yourself, okay, what changes were there? What things stayed constant? What things stayed different? What of those can we ascribe to the types of cycling that the individuals were doing? And then we can start to compare that side by side with various different self-reports for changes in mood, changes in cognition, testing for different changes in mood and changes in cognition. And then we can start to learn, okay, what regions of the brain, what activity is changing due to a ride, and is that driving in a specific way, one of the outcomes that we want to improve, whether it be sort of cognition, mood, mental health, things like this. So this is just an example here. You have someone who's sitting still on a bike and you see a certain activity. You have someone pedaling on a bike and you can sort of see how that activity changes if the pedaling is sort of static, and then they can sort of pedal their bike around freely, and you sort of see again sort of slight differences in the activity. All of this, we just have to sort of remember when we're analyzing everything, is that all of this movement creates a certain artifact, and that's just something that we sort of have to correct for in the analysis before we start to make any interpretations. But these kinds of artifacts, they're still they're a challenge in the field, but there are ways to address them. That means we can still progress nicely. So let's go on to the next slide. So this is a big graph, and I don't expect everyone to sort of take it all in at once here, but this was just to illustrate the broad range of effects that exercise can have on brain and behavior. So we've learned a lot about the effects on behavior over the talks that we've had so far this morning. And you sort of see that a bit in this first section here, just with these behavioral changes. But I just wanted to draw your attention to sort of the range of neurophysiological changes that happen, changes in different evoked responses in the brain, changes in the power in different sort of functional frequency bands of the brain. But these changes aren't just limited to the electrical response of the brain. You actually observe changes also in the sort of the neurochemical responses in the brain. So you see different levels of neurotransmitter, you see other chemicals that are sort of fundamental to brain function changing as a result of exercise effects. And it's not just in one area. If you look over on the far right-hand side there, you can see the sort of anatomical sites range far and wide, all the way from sort of hippocampus, frontal cortex, parietal cortex, primary motor cortex, prefrontal cortex. I mean, this really covers, the entire scope of the brain, and it sort of is just to emphasize, how many areas are sort of behaving in unison here in order to respond to cycling itself, and then the changes that you see across all of these areas in order to drive the changes in behavior and the sort of positive outcomes that we want for individuals who are cycling. So if you go on to the next slide, this is another example of differences versus inside and outside. So we've heard a little bit about some of the changes in behavior that are sort of that have been motivated and sort of outcomes that have been improved by this idea of sort of green exercise or exercising outdoors. This is just to give you a sort of an example of some of the underlying neurophysiology of this. So what you're looking at here on the left is an evoked response that was recorded before and after some exercise, either inside or outside. And you can see in the dark blue line, which is sort of what I want everyone to focus on here, is that actually when you look at these evoked responses after an exercise outside, you see this increased amplitude in these evoked responses. And this is a very scientific measure, sort of taken in isolation of everything else, in the sense that it underlies various different sort of cognitive measures, but it's one example of sort of trying to understand that relationship between the positive behavioral outcomes we see, and the changes in brain activity that drive this. So, you know, if your cognition is improved after a ride, it may very well be due to the increase in the amplitude of a signal like this. And that's just the sort of highlight throughout this and these other results I've shown, the sort of the scale of the changes that are happening in the brain, and the ways in which we can try and understand how that relates to the positive outcomes that we see when we sort of speak to individuals after they've been part of sort of riding programs. So if we go to the next slide. So sort of the future question in all of this is how can we utilize this information? So you can imagine now that what we can do by recording non-invasively these brain signals before, during, or after a riding program is that we could identify types of brain signals that have the biggest influence on changes in behavioral outcomes. And then what we could do is record these signals during cycling, compare baselines before and afterwards, and actually try and tailor programs to promote changes in these specific signals. So at the moment, for physical health, everyone might be very familiar with training using a heart rate monitor. And you might record your heart rate and you might say, okay, I'm going to train in this heart rate zone for this amount of time, and I can expect this kind of sort of physical benefit from it. So the idea with recording brain signals before and after and during cycling sessions is to have a very similar sort of principle, but applied to not measures of sort of physical health, but measures of promoting mental health and well-being. And that's to say that you can record a signal and you could say, okay, you know, what we want to do is we want to keep this signal in this particular zone during that session. And we might tailor that session to make it sort of more related to some sprint activity, more related to some endurance activity. But we know by promoting that particular signal, we're likely to drive a more positive outcome in a sort of a particular improvement that we're hoping to see for someone taking part in the course. So the idea there is sort of to work hand in hand, of course, with everything that we've heard so far about making sure that these courses are accessible and that they're fun and that people are sort of just out there enjoying them, you know, with no pressure to do this, but to sort of allow a way for individuals who want to sort of set certain goals for their recovery or certain goals for what they want to get out of these sessions, a sort of a physiological way of measuring this and working towards it. But you know, a lot of this at the moment is sort of has only been demonstrated kind of in principle or sort of in very academically. And these kinds of things aren't yet sort of tested and implemented in trail therapy programs or the different kinds of riding programs that we've seen rolled out in various different places around the world. So sort of more research is needed to develop these ideas. And that's sort of my and colleagues' sort of interest as academics and cyclists trying to sort of work in with people who are doing the very much the sort of behavioral programs, and then to sort of develop these ideas and sort of demonstrate that this can be something that works. And in a lot of conversations with policymakers and in sort of situations where you might want to try and change sort of a clinical standard of care in order to recommend a trail therapy program like this as part of someone's sort of treatment plan. A lot of the time, if you want to sort of enact policy or change policy like that, as much as you need the qualitative behavioral outcomes that you can record from interviewing people after sessions, there's an expectation that there will be a sort of a quantitative physiological measure that can come with it and a sort of a literature to support that. So I think these sort of two areas go hand in hand, both in terms of understanding the underlying brain activity to get the best outcomes for individuals, but also in terms of using the sort of body of work that we're all developing in order to enact policy changes in the future that make programs like this sort of front and center in treatment plans for people who need access to them. And I believe, if you just go to the last slide, that is everything. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bashford. I think we have time for one, maybe two short questions before we move on. So I'll check here both on the Zoom. And we'll also see here, but we have one question that just came in. It says, thank you, Dr. Luke. I'm curious if there have been any studies around riding solo versus riding with others or in a community.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, behaviorally, yes. We've seen some evidence of that so far in the talks today. In terms of sort of just purely the changes on evoked neurophysiology, not at all. But these are exactly the kind of outstanding questions that we hope to address by incorporating some of these brain recordings and neurophysiological measures into programs that are running at the moment.
Great. I think we have another one here.
Thank you, Dr. Bashford. When I was a kid, heart rate monitors moved from a space of, clinical space into a space where you could wear it on your body and see that data about your heart's activity in real time. And I'm wondering if there's a similar movement in the world of watching your brain activity. Like, are there ways in which people may in the future or currently be able to do that in real time?
Yes, absolutely. So in much the same way that heart rate monitors have sort of now become a sort of integral part of most wearable devices. I mean, they're in watches, you can wear them in the traditional sense, all of these kinds of things. There has been a sort of a very rapid acceleration in these kinds of wearable technology for various kinds of physiological measures. And neurophysiological measures are kind of the next frontier of this. So there are very many devices, some available on the market at the moment, some in development, all looking to sort of reliably record brain activity while people sort of do various tasks. I mean, there are some that are interested in exercise. There are some that are interested in brain activity during sleep. And, they come with various different apps that would allow you to kind of track this and can make recommendations based on the data that they receive. So yes, while everyone is sort of very familiar with measuring heart rate and measuring steps and with accelerometers, currently, I suspect within a few years, people will be equally familiar with having sort of devices, wearables that allow them to track certain brain signals. Absolutely.
Thank you. I have a million more questions for you, but I'm also trying to keep this ship on track. So we'll follow up with you and we'll share those questions with the audience. So if you have additional ones, either online, put them in that Zoom Q&A for Dr. Bashford to see. Here, of course, we can have further conversations and we'll make sure we get those questions to him. But for now, we'll give everyone a break to get up, move around, get some water, some coffee, and we'll be back here in 10 minutes to try to keep it relatively on time. So we'll see you back here at 10:35 Pacific. So thank you all.